What if I told you that one of the greatest threats to England's future was hidden from the world, buried so deep that not a single whisper reached the press? That a shocking attempt was made on the life of the Prime Minister, one that could have changed the course of history forever, and that only one man had the brilliance to unravel the truth before it was too late. Yes, dear listeners, you are about to step into the world of intrigue, danger, and razor-sharp deduction. A tale written by the legendary Agatha Christie and narrated exclusively for Tales Channel. So sit tight, listen carefully, and don't forget to subscribe, because mysteries like these come once in a lifetime. There are moments in history so delicate, so perilous, that even the smallest misstep could lead to utter disaster. And this, my friends, was one such moment. The war had left deep scars on the world, but the dangers had not passed. Shadows still lurked, conspiracies still brewed in the dark, and one of the greatest threats to England's future had been buried in secrecy, until now. I alone know the truth of what happened during that national crisis. The story of how Hercule Poirot, my eccentric but brilliant friend, single-handedly averted catastrophe. The events were hushed up, hidden away from the public eye. But now the time for secrecy is over. England deserves to know how close she came to disaster, and how she was saved by a man unlike any other. It all began on an evening like any other. I, Captain Hastings, had fallen into a comfortable routine after being invalided out of the army. My new role in recruitment work left me with ample time, and so, every evening after dinner, I would make my way to Poirot's little apartment. We would sit, talk, and dissect the most intriguing cases of the day. But that night was different. As I entered the room, the air was thick with the sharp scent of benzene. Poirot, ever the perfectionist, was meticulously dabbing at a tiny grease spot on his immaculate grey suit. His expression was one of intense concentration, as if the fate of the world rested on the removal of that one insignificant blemish. "In a little minute, my friend," he murmured without looking up. "I have all but finished. This spot of grease, he is not good. But voila, he is no more." With a triumphant flourish, he waved his tiny sponge in the air. I chuckled, shaking my head as I lit a cigarette. Only you, Poirot, would consider a grease stain worthy of such careful attention. He simply shrugged, smoothing down the fabric with satisfaction. "Order and method, Hastings. Even the smallest detail, he is important." But I was not in the mood for his usual quirks. That evening, something far more serious was on my mind. "Poirot," I said, leaning forward, "have you read today's news about the Prime Minister?" Poirot's delicate fingers paused, his eyes flickering with sudden interest. "The attempted assassination, yes." I nodded grimly. The reports were heavily censored, but what little they did say was enough to send a chill down my spine. Someone tried to kill Mr. David McAdam. A bullet grazed his cheek, just inches away from ending his life. Do you realize what this means? How could such a thing even happen? The Prime Minister of England, nearly assassinated. It's a disgrace. The police must have been unbelievably careless to allow such an attack. Poirot steepled his fingers, his sharp eyes gleaming. "Ah, mon ami, you see only the surface. But tell me, what is it that troubles you the most?" I exhaled, shaking my head. "The timing, Poirot. It's too convenient. Peace by negotiation. That's what England's enemies have been demanding. And MacAdam, he's been the fiercest opponent of any such notion. They call him Fighting Max for a reason. If he had died, England would have lost more than a prime minister. We would have lost our strongest defense against the very forces trying to weaken us from within." For a moment, Poirot was silent. Then, ever so slowly, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Hastings, what if I told you that this was only the beginning?" A chill ran down my spine. There was something in his tone, something that hinted at far darker truths yet to be uncovered. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. Poirot straightened up, brushing a speck of imaginary dust from his sleeve. "Let us not jump to conclusions just yet, mon ami. For now I have my own case to attend to, one involving a missing husband and a most unfortunate charlady." I stared at him in disbelief. "A missing husband, Poirot," I'm talking about a conspiracy that could shake the very foundations of England. And you're worried about a domestic squabble. A knowing smile curled on Poirot's lips. Ah, Hastings, the greatest mysteries often begin with the smallest of puzzles. You see, I have a little idea that when this husband is found, he will not be pleased. And perhaps, just perhaps, this insignificant little affair is more important than it seems. I sighed, shaking my head. As always, Poirot was impossible to predict. But one thing was certain, something sinister was afoot, and little did I know, we were about to be pulled into one of the most dangerous cases of our lives. The game had already begun. I laughed. At last, the spot of grease, he is gone. I am at your disposal. I was asking you what you thought of this attempt to assassinate Macadam. Enfantillage, replied Poirot promptly. One can hardly take it seriously. To fire with the rifle, never does it succeed. It is a device of the past. It was very near succeeding this time, I reminded him. Poirot shook his head impatiently. He was about to reply when the landlady thrust her head round the door and informed him that there were two gentlemen below who wanted to see him. They won't give their names, sir, but they says as it's very important. Let them mount, said Poirot, carefully folding his grey trousers. In a few minutes the two visitors were ushered in, and my heart gave a leap as in the foremost I recognized no less a personage than Lord Esther, leader of the House of Commons, whilst his companion Mr. Bernard Dodge was also a member of the War Cabinet, and as I knew, a close personal friend of the Prime Minister. Monsieur Poirot? Said Lord Esther interrogatively. My friend bowed. The great man looked at me and hesitated. My business is private. You may speak freely before Captain Hastings, said my friend, nodding to me to remain. He has not all the gifts, no, but I answer for his discretion. Lord Esther still hesitated, but Mr. Dodge broke in abruptly. Oh, come on, don't let's beat about the bush. As far as I can see, the whole of England will know the hole we're in soon enough. Time's everything. Pray be seated, messieurs, said Poirot politely. Will you take the big chair, my lord? Lord Esther started slightly. You know me, Poirot smiled. Certainly. I read the little papers with the pictures. How should I not know you? Monsieur Poirot, I have come to consult you upon a matter of the most vital urgency. I must ask for absolute secrecy. You have the word of Hercule Poirot. I can say no more, said my friend grandiloquently. It concerns the Prime Minister. We are in grave trouble. We're up a tree, interposed Mr. Dodge. The injury is serious then? I asked. What injury? The bullet wound. Oh, that, cried Mr. Dodge contemptuously. That's old history. As my colleague says, continued Lord Esther, that affair is over and done with. Luckily it failed. I wished I could say as much for the second attempt. There has been a second attempt then? Yes, though not of the same nature. Monsieur Poirot, the Prime Minister has disappeared. What? He has been kidnapped? Impossible, I cried, stupefied. Poirot threw a withering glance at me, which I knew enjoined me to keep my mouth shut. Unfortunately, impossible as it seems, it is only too true, continued his lordship. Poirot looked at Mr. Dodge. You said just now, messieurs, that time was everything. What did you mean by that? The two men exchanged glances, and then Lord Esther said, You have heard, Monsieur Poirot, of the approaching Allied conference. My friend nodded. For obvious reasons, no details have been given of when and where it is to take place, but although it has been kept out of the newspapers, the date is of course widely known in diplomatic circles. The conference is to be held tomorrow, Thursday, evening at Versailles. Now you perceive the terrible gravity of the situation. I will not conceal from you that the Prime Minister's presence at the conference is a vital necessity. The pacifist propaganda, started and maintained by the German agents in our midst, has been very active. It is the universal opinion that the turning point of the conference will be the strong personality of the Prime Minister. His absence may have the most serious results, possibly a premature and disastrous peace, and we have no one who can be sent in his place. He alone can represent England. Poirot's face had grown very grave. Then you regard the kidnapping of the Prime Minister as a direct attempt to prevent his being present at the conference? Most certainly I do. He was actually on his way to France at the time, and the conference is to be held at 9 o'clock tomorrow night. Poirot drew an enormous watch from his pocket. It is now 8:45. 24 hours, said Mr. Dodge thoughtfully. And a quarter, amended Poirot. Do not forget the quarter, monsieur. It may come useful. Now for the details. The abduction, did it take place in England or in France? In France. Mr. McAdam crossed to France this morning. He was to stay tonight as the guest of the Commander-in-Chief, proceeding tomorrow to Paris. He was conveyed across the Channel by destroyer. At Boulogne he was met by a car from General Headquarters, and one of the Commander-in-Chief's AD.Cs.
Eh bien?
Well, they started from Boulogne, but they never arrived. What? Monsieur Poirot, it was a bogus car, and a bogus ADC. The real car was found in a side road, with the chauffeur and the ADC neatly gagged and bound, and the bogus car is still at large. Poirot made a gesture of impatience. Incredible. Surely it cannot escape attention for long. So we thought. It seemed merely a question of searching thoroughly. That part of France is under military law. We were convinced that the car could not go long unnoticed. The French police and our own Scotland Yard men and the military are straining every nerve. It is, as you say, incredible, but nothing has been discovered. At that moment a tap came at the door, and a young officer entered with a heavily sealed envelope, which he handed to Lord Esther. Just through from France, Sergio. I brought it on here, as you directed. The minister tore it open and uttered an exclamation. The officer withdrew. Here is news at last. This telegram has just been decoded. They have found the second car, also the secretary, Daniels, chloroformed, gagged, and bound, in an abandoned farm near sea. He remembers nothing, except something being pressed against his mouth and nose from behind, and struggling to free himself. The police are satisfied as to the genuineness of his statement, and they have found nothing else? No, not the Prime Minister's dead body. Then there is hope. But it is strange. Why, after trying to shoot him this morning, are they now taking so much trouble to keep him alive? Dodge shook his head. One thing's quite certain. They're determined at all costs to prevent his attending the conference. If it is humanly possible, the Prime Minister shall be. God grant it is not too late. Now, messieurs, recount to me everything, from the beginning. I must know about this shooting affair as well. Last night, the Prime Minister, accompanied by one of his secretaries, Captain Daniels, the same who accompanied him to France. As I was saying, they motored down to Windsor, where the Prime Minister was granted an audience. Early this morning, he returned to town, and it was on the way that the attempted assassination took place. One moment, if you please. Who is this Captain Daniels? You have his dossier? Lord Esther smiled. I thought you would ask me that. We do not know very much of him. He is of no particular fact. He has served in the English army, and is an extremely able secretary, being an exceptionally fine linguist. I believe he speaks 7 languages. It is for that reason that the Prime Minister chose him to accompany him to France. Has he any relatives in England? 2 aunts, a Mrs. Everard, who lives at Hampstead, and a Miss Daniels, who lives near Ascot. Ascot? That is near to Windsor, is it not? That point has not been overlooked, but it has led to nothing. You regard the Captain Daniels, then, as above suspicion. A shade of bitterness crept into Lord Esther's voice, as he replied, No, Monsieur Poirot, in these days I should hesitate before I pronounced anyone above suspicion. Très bien. Now I understand, milord, that the Prime Minister would, as a matter of course, be under vigilant police protection, which ought to render any assault upon him an impossibility. Lord Esther bowed his head. That is so. The Prime Minister's car was closely followed by another car containing detectives in plain clothes. Mr. McAdam knew nothing of these precautions. He is personally a most fearless man, and would be inclined to sweep them away arbitrarily. But naturally, the police make their own arrangements. In fact, the Premier's chauffeur O'Murphy is a CID man. O'Murphy, that is a name of Ireland, is it not so? Yes, he is an Irishman. From what part of Ireland? County Clare, I believe. TNs. But proceed, my lord. The Premier started for London. The car was a closed one. He and Captain Daniels sat inside. The second car followed as usual. But, unluckily for some unknown reason, the Prime Minister's car deviated from the main road, at a point where the road interrupted Poirot. Yes, but how did you know? Oh, c'est évident. Continue. For some unknown reason, continued Lord Esther, the Premier's car left the main road. The police car, unaware of the deviation, continued to keep to the high road. At a short distance down the unfrequented lane, the Prime Minister's car was suddenly held up by a band of masked men. The chauffeur, that brave O'Murphy, murmured Poirot thoughtfully. The chauffeur, momentarily taken aback, jammed on the brakes. The Prime Minister put his head out of the window. Instantly a shot rang out, then another. The first one grazed his cheek. The second, fortunately, went wide. The chauffeur, now realizing the danger, instantly forged straight ahead, scattering the band of men. A near escape, I ejaculated, with a shiver. Mr. McAdam refused to make any fuss over the slight wound he had received. He declared it was only a scratch. He stopped at a local cottage hospital, where it was dressed and bound up. He did not, of course, reveal his identity. He then drove, as schedule, straight to Charing Cross, where a special train for Dover was awaiting him, and after a brief account of what had happened had been given to the anxious police by Captain Daniels, he duly departed for France. At Dover, he went on board the waiting destroyer. At Boulogne, as you know, the bogus car was waiting for him, carrying the Union Jack, and correct in every detail. That is all you have to tell. Yes, there is no other circumstance that you have omitted, my lord. Well, there is one rather peculiar thing. Yes, the Prime Minister's car did not return home. After leaving the Prime Minister at Charing Cross, the police were anxious to interview O'Murphy, so a search was instituted at once. The car was discovered standing outside a certain unsavory little restaurant in Soho, which is well known as a meeting place of German agents, and the chauffeur was nowhere to be found. He too had disappeared. So said Poirot thoughtfully. There are two disappearances, the Prime Minister in France, and O'Murphy in London. He looked keenly at Lord Esther, who made a gesture of despair. I can only tell you, Monsieur Poirot, that if anyone had suggested to me yesterday that O'Murphy was a traitor, I should have laughed in his face. And today I do not know what to think. Poirot nodded gravely. He looked at his turnip of a watch again. I understand that I have carte blanche, messieurs, in every way. I must be able to go where I choose, and how I choose, perfectly. There is a special train leaving for Dover in an hour's time, with a further contingent from Scotland Yard. You shall be accompanied by a military officer, and a CID man, who will hold themselves at your disposal in every way. Is that satisfactory? Quite. One more question before you leave, messieurs. What made you come to me? I am unknown, obscure in this great London of yours. We sought you out on the express recommendation and wish of a very great man of your own country. Comment, my old friend the Prefect. Lord Esther shook his head. One higher than the Prefect, one whose word was once law in Belgium, and shall be again. That England has sworn. Poirot's hand flew swiftly to a dramatic salute. Amen to that. Ah, but my master does not forget. Messieurs, I, Hercule Poirot, will serve you faithfully. Heaven only send that it will be in time. But this is dark, dark, I cannot see. Well, Poirot, I cried impatiently, as the door closed behind the ministers, what do you think? My friend was busy packing a minute suitcase. With quick, deft movements, he shook his head thoughtfully. I do not know what to think. My brains desert me. Why, as you said, kidnap him, when a knock on the head would do as well. I mused. Pardon me, mon ami, but I did not quite say that. It is undoubtedly far more their affair to kidnap him. But why? Because uncertainty creates panic. That is one reason. Were the Prime Minister dead, it would be a terrible calamity, but the situation would have to be faced. But now you have paralysis. Will the Prime Minister reappear, or will he not? Is he dead, or alive? Nobody knows, and until they know nothing definite can be done. And as I tell you, uncertainty breeds panic, which is what les Boches are playing for. Then again, if the kidnappers are holding him secretly somewhere, they have the advantage of being able to make terms with both sides. The German government is not a liberal paymaster, as a rule, but no doubt they can be made to disgorge substantial remittances in such a case as this. Thirdly, they run no risk of the hangman's rope. Oh, decidedly, kidnapping is their affair. Then, if that is so, why should they first try to shoot him? Poirot made a gesture of anger. Ah, that is just what I do not understand. It is inexplicable, stupid. They have all their arrangements made, and very good arrangements too, for the abduction, and yet they imperil the whole affair by a melodramatic attack, worthy of a cinema, and quite as unreal. It is almost impossible to believe in it, with its band of masked men, not 20 miles from London. Perhaps they were two quite separate attempts, which happened irrespective of each other, I suggested. Ah no, that would be too much of a coincidence. Then further, who is the traitor? There must have been a traitor, in the first affair anyway. But who was it? Daniels, or O'Murphy? It must have been one of the two, or why did the car leave the main road? We cannot suppose that the Prime Minister connived at his own assassination. Did O'Murphy take that turning of his own accord? Or was it Daniels, who told him to do so? Surely it must have been O'Murphy's doing. Yes, because if it was Daniels the Prime Minister would have heard the order, and would have asked the reason. But there are altogether too many wises in this affair, and they contradict each other. If O'Murphy is an honest man, why did he leave the main road? He was a dishonest man. Why did he start the car again when only 2 shots had been fired? Thereby, in all probability, saving the Prime Minister's life. And again, if he was honest, why did he immediately on leaving Charing Cross, drive to a well-known rendezvous of German spies? It looks bad, I said. Let us look at the case with method. What have we for and against these 2 men? Take O'Murphy first. Against that his conduct in leaving the main road was suspicious, that he is an Irishman from County Clare, that he has disappeared in a highly suggestive manner, for that his promptness in restarting the car saved the Premier's life, that he is a Scotland Yard man, and obviously from the post allotted to him, a trusted detective. Now for Daniels. There is not much against him, except the fact that nothing is known of his antecedents, and that he speaks too many languages for a good Englishman. Pardon me, mon ami, but as linguists you are deplorable. Now for him, we have the fact that he was found gagged, bound, and chloroformed, which does not look as though he had anything to do with the matter. He might have gagged and bound himself to divert suspicion. Poirot shook his head. The French police would make no mistake of that kind. Besides, once he had attained his object, and the Prime Minister was safely abducted, there would not be much point in his remaining behind. His accomplices could have gagged and chloroformed him, of course, but I fail to see what object they hoped to accomplish by it. He can be of little use to them now, for until the circumstances concerning the Prime Minister have been cleared up, he is bound to be closely watched. Perhaps he hoped to start the police on a false scent. Then why did he not do so? He merely says that something was pressed over his nose and mouth, and that he remembers nothing more. There is no false scent there. It sounds remarkably like the truth. Well, I said, glancing at the clock, I suppose we'd better start for the station. You may find more clues in France. Possibly, mon ami, but I doubt it. It is still incredible to me that the Prime Minister has not been discovered in that limited area, where the difficulty of concealing him must be tremendous. If the military and the police of 2 countries have not found him, how shall I? At Charing Cross we were met by Mr. Dodge. This is Detective Barnes, of Scotland Yard, and they will hold themselves entirely at your disposal. Good luck to you. It's a bad business, but I've not given up hope. Must be off now. And the Minister strode rapidly away. We chatted in a desultory fashion with Major Norman. In the center of the little group of men on the platform, I recognized a little ferret-faced fellow talking to a tall, fair man. He was an old acquaintance of Poirot's, Detective Inspector Japp, supposed to be one of the smartest of Scotland Yard's officers. He came over and greeted my friend cheerfully. I heard you were on this job too. Smart bit of work. So far they've got away with the goods all right. But I can't believe they can keep him hidden long. Our people are going through France with a tooth comb, so are the French. I can't help feeling it's only a matter of hours now, that is if he's still alive, remarked the tall detective gloomily. Japp's face fell. Yes, but somehow I've got the feeling he's alive all right. Poirot nodded. Yes, he's alive, but can he be found in time? I, like you, did not believe he could be hidden so long. The whistle blew, and we all trooped up into the Pullman car. Then with a slow, unwilling jerk, the train drew out of the station. It was a curious journey. The Scotland Yard men crowded together. Maps of northern France were spread out, and eager forefingers traced the lines of roads and villages. Each man had his own pet theory. Poirot showed none of his usual loquacity, but sat staring in front of him, with an expression on his face that reminded me of a puzzled child. I talked to Norman, whom I found quite an amusing fellow. On arriving at Dover, Poirot's behavior moved me to intense amusement. The little man, as he went on board the boat, clutched desperately at my arm. The wind was blowing lustily. Mon Dieu, he murmured, this is terrible. Have courage, Poirot, I cried. You will succeed.
You will find him.
I am sure of it. Ah, mon ami, you mistake my emotion. It is this villainous sea that troubles me. The mal de mer.
It is horrible suffering.
Oh, I said, rather taken aback.
Oh.
The first throb of the engines was felt, and Poirot groaned and closed his eyes. Major Norman has a map of northern France.
If you would like to study it.
Poirot shook his head impatiently. But no, leave me, my friend. See you to think. The stomach and the brain must be in harmony. Lavoisier has a method most excellent for averting the mal de mer. You breathe in and out slowly, so turning the head from left to right, and counting 6 between each breath. I left him to his gymnastic endeavors, and went on deck. As we came slowly into Boulogne harbor, Poirot appeared, neat and smiling, and announced to me in a whisper that Lavoisier's system had succeeded to a marvel. Japp's forefinger was still tracing imaginary routes on his map. Nonsense. The car started from Boulogne. Here they branched off. Now my idea is that they transferred the Prime Minister to another car. See? Well, said the taller detective. I shall make for the seaports. 10 to 1. They've smuggled him on board a ship. Japp shook his head. Too obvious. The order went out at once to close all the ports. The day was just breaking as we landed. Major Norman touched Poirot on the arm. There's a military car here waiting for you, sir. Thank you, monsieur. But for the moment I do not propose to leave Boulogne. What? No, we will enter this hotel here, by the quay. He suited the action to the word, demanded and was accorded a private room. We three followed him, puzzled and uncomprehending. He shot a quick glance at us. It is not so that the good detective should act, eh? I perceive your thought. He must be full of energy. He must rush to and fro. He should prostrate himself on the dusty road, and seek the marks of tires through a little glass. He must gather up the cigarette end, the fallen match. That is your idea, is it not? His eyes challenged us. But I, Hercule Poirot, tell you that it is not so. The true clues are within. Here. He tapped his forehead. See you, I need not have left London. It would have been sufficient for me to sit quietly in my rooms there. All that matters is the little grey cells within. Secretly and silently they do their part, until suddenly I call for a map, and I lay my finger on a spot. So, and I say the Prime Minister is there, and it is, with method and logic one can accomplish anything. This frantic rushing to France was a mistake. It is playing a child's game of hide and seek. But now, though it may be too late, I will set to work the right way from within. Silence, my friends, I beg of you. And for 5 long hours, the little man sat motionless, blinking his eyelids like a cat, his green eyes flickering and becoming steadily greener and greener. The Scotland Yard man was obviously contemptuous, Major Norman was bored and impatient, and I myself found the time pass with wearisome slowness. Finally I got up, and strolled as noiselessly as I could to the window. The matter was becoming a farce. I was secretly concerned for my friend. If he failed, I would have preferred him to fail in a less ridiculous manner. Out of the window I idly watched the daily leave boat, belching forth columns of smoke, as she lay alongside the quay. Suddenly I was aroused by Poirot's voice, close to my elbow. "Mes amis, let us start." I turned. An extraordinary transformation had come over my friend. His eyes were flickering with excitement. His chest was swelled to the uttermost. "I have been an imbecile, my friends. But I see daylight at last." Major Norman moved hastily to the door. "I'll order the car." "There is no need. I shall not use it. Thank heaven the wind has fallen." "Do you mean you are going to walk, sir?" "No, my young friend. I am no Saint Peter. I prefer to cross the sea by boat." "To cross the sea?" "Yes, to work with method. One must begin from the beginning. And the beginning of this affair was in England. Therefore we return to England." "Yes, England." At 3 o'clock we stood once more upon Charing Cross platform. To all our expostulations, Poirot turned a deaf ear, and reiterated again and again, that to start at the beginning was not a waste of time, but the only way. On the way over, he had conferred with Norman in a low voice, and the latter had dispatched a sheaf of telegrams from Dover. Owing to the special passes held by Norman, we got through everywhere in record time. In London, a large police car was waiting for us, with some plain-clothes men, one of whom handed a typewritten sheet of paper to my friend. He answered my inquiring glance. "A list of the cottage hospitals within a certain radius west of London." I wired for it from Dover. We were whirled rapidly through the London streets. We were on the Bath Road. On we went, through Hammersmith, Chiswick and Brentford. I began to see our objective. Through Windsor and on to Ascot. My heart gave a leap. Ascot was where Daniels had an aunt living. We were after him then, not O'Murphy. We duly stopped at the gate of a trim villa. Poirot jumped out and rang the bell. I saw a perplexed frown dimming the radiance of his face. Plainly he was not satisfied. The bell was answered. He was ushered inside. In a few moments he reappeared, and climbed into the car with a short, sharp shake of his head. My hopes began to die down. It was past 4 now. Even if he found certain evidence incriminating Daniels, what would be the good of it, unless he could wring from someone the exact spot in France where they were holding the Prime Minister? Our return progress towards London was an interrupted one. We deviated from the main road more than once, and occasionally stopped at a small building, which I had no difficulty in recognizing as a cottage hospital. Poirot only spent a few minutes at each, but at every halt his radiant assurance was more and more restored. He whispered something to Norman, to which the latter replied, "Yes, if you turn off to the left, you will find them waiting by the bridge." We turned up a side road, and in the failing light I discerned a second car, waiting by the side of the road. It contained 2 men in plain clothes. Poirot got down and spoke to them, and then we started off in a northerly direction, the other car following close behind. We drove for some time, our objective being obviously one of the northern suburbs of London. Finally we drove up to the front door of a tall house, standing a little back from the road in its own grounds. Norman and I were left with the car. Poirot and one of the detectives went up to the door and rang. A neat parlour-maid opened it. The detective spoke. "I am a police officer, and I have a warrant to search this house." The girl gave a little scream, and a tall, handsome woman of middle age appeared behind her in the hall. "Shut the door, Edith. They are burglars, I expect." But Poirot swiftly inserted his foot in the door, and at the same moment blew a whistle. Instantly the other detectives ran up, and poured into the house, shutting the door behind them. Norman and I spent about 5 minutes cursing our forced inactivity. Finally the door reopened, and the men emerged, escorting 3 prisoners, a woman and 2 men. The woman and one of the men were taken to the second car. The other man was placed in our car by Poirot himself. "I must go with the others, my friend, but have great care of this gentleman. You do not know him, no? Eh bien, let me present to you Monsieur Murphy."
"Oh, Murphy."
I gaped at him open-mouthed, as we started again. He was not handcuffed, but I did not fancy he would try to escape. He sat there staring in front of him as though dazed. Anyway, Norman and I would be more than a match for him. To my surprise, we still kept a northerly route. We were not returning to London, then. I was much puzzled. Suddenly, as the car slowed down, I recognized that we were close to Hendon Aerodrome. Immediately I grasped Poirot's idea. He proposed to reach France by aeroplane. It was a sporting idea, but on the face of it, impracticable. A telegram would be far quicker. Time was everything. He must leave the personal glory of rescuing the Prime Minister to others. As we drew up, Major Norman jumped out, and the plain-clothes man took his place. He conferred with Poirot for a few minutes, and then went off briskly. I, too, jumped out, and caught Poirot by the arm. I congratulate you, old fellow. They have told you the hiding place. But look here, you must wire to France at once. You'll be too late if you go yourself. Poirot looked at me curiously for a minute or two. Unfortunately, my friend, there are some things that cannot be sent by telegram. Auritus idiscidamented. At that moment Major Norman returned, accompanied by a young officer in the uniform of the Flying Corps. This is Captain Lyle, who will fly you over to France. He can start at once. Wrap up warmly, sir, said the young pilot. I can lend you a coat if you like. Poirot was consulting his enormous watch. He murmured to himself, yes, there is time, just time. Then he looked up, and bowed politely to the young officer. I thank you, monsieur, but it is not I who am your passenger. It is this gentleman here. He moved a little aside as he spoke, and the figure came forward out of the darkness. It was the second male prisoner who had gone in the other car, and as the light fell on his face, I gave a gasp of surprise. It was the Prime Minister. For heaven's sake, tell me all about it, I cried impatiently, as Poirot Norman and I motored back to London. How in the world did they manage to smuggle him back to England? There was no need to smuggle him back, replied Poirot dryly. The Prime Minister has never left England. He was kidnapped on his way from Windsor to London. What? I will make all clear. The Prime Minister was in his car, his secretary beside him. Suddenly a pad of chloroform is clapped on his face. But by whom? By the clever linguistic Captain Daniels. As soon as the Prime Minister is unconscious, Daniels picks up the speaking tube, and directs O'Murphy to turn to the right, which the chauffeur, quite unsuspicious, does. A few yards down that unfrequented road, a large car is standing, apparently broken down. Its driver signals to O'Murphy to stop. O'Murphy slows up. The stranger approaches. Daniels leans out of the window, and probably with the aid of an instantaneous anesthetic, such as ethyl chloride, the chloroform trick is repeated. In a few seconds the two helpless men are dragged out and transferred to the other car, and a pair of substitutes take their places. Impossible, pardon tout. Have you not seen music hall turns imitating celebrities with marvelous accuracy? Nothing is easier than to impersonate a public figure, especially when that figure is a man as widely recognized, yet as carefully guarded as the Prime Minister of England. The irony of it all was that a man of such importance, whose very presence commanded rooms, and changed the course of nations, could be mimicked with astonishing ease. A common man, John Smith of Clapham, might have been harder to replace in his daily routine, but the Prime Minister, with the right disguise and careful maneuvering, he was the perfect role to understudy, and that was precisely what happened. O'Murphy's so-called double had a simple task: slip into the role just long enough to fool the world. Who would suspect a thing? The public saw what they were meant to see, a bandaged, weary man who had narrowly escaped death, his features hidden under layers of gauze, his voice subdued due to his well-known tendency to rest it before delivering a great speech. Daniels, the Prime Minister's trusted secretary, had played his part well, shielding the impostor from unnecessary contact. No unnecessary conversations, no interactions with those who might have detected something amiss. By the time anyone had a reason to look closer, it would be too late. The real Prime Minister would have already vanished without a trace. And O'Murphy? His exit was just as meticulously planned. He had driven from Charing Cross to a discreet meeting point, stepping inside as O'Murphy, and emerging as an entirely new man. His trail had been deliberately muddied, leading investigators down a twisting path of false clues. By the time suspicions arose, he was already lost in the shadows. Hastings, still grappling with the intricacy of the scheme, shook his head in disbelief. But the man who impersonated the Prime Minister was seen by thousands, he exclaimed. Poirot smiled, his sharp eyes glinting with satisfaction. Seen, mon ami? Yes, recognized. No, there is a difference. The deception had been almost effortless, a masterful illusion, relying not on extravagant trickery, but on the simple, often overlooked details of human nature. People see what they expect to see. They accept without question what is presented to them, especially when given a plausible explanation. In France, however, the masquerade could not continue. That was why the real Prime Minister had to disappear before he could be unmasked. And to ensure that no one thought to question the details of the earlier attack, Daniels himself had been chloroformed and gagged, a victim of the supposed abduction, a piece of the puzzle designed to throw off any prying eyes. Hastings exhaled slowly, realization dawning on him, and the man who played the role of the Prime Minister, Poirot chuckled, shaking his head. He and his chauffeur, the one who had driven him to the fateful meeting, would simply vanish into obscurity. Perhaps they would be picked up later, detained as mere suspicious characters, but no one, not even the sharpest investigator, would ever dream of suspecting their true involvement in this grand illusion. They would be questioned, examined, and finding nothing out of the ordinary, eventually released. No evidence, no trail. Hastings was still digesting the implications when the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. And the real Prime Minister? He asked, voice tight with anticipation. He never left England, Poirot said simply, a knowing smile playing on his lips. From the very beginning he was hidden away, taken straight from the supposed scene of the crime to a safe house in Hampstead, a house belonging to none other than Mrs. Everard, Daniel's supposed aunt. But mon cher Hastings, this woman was no gentle old relative. She was none other than Frau Bertha Ebenthal, a dangerous player in the enemy's game. Scotland Yard had been searching for her for quite some time. Poirot leaned back in his chair, satisfied. A most valuable little present I have delivered into their hands, not just her but Daniel's as well. A grand scheme, oui. But they did not account for the brilliance of Hercule Poirot. His small moment of vanity was well earned, Hastings thought, but something still nagged at him. When did you first begin to suspect the truth? He asked, unable to contain his curiosity. Poirot's expression turned thoughtful. My friend, it was simple. One must always begin by looking inward. The pieces did not fit. That first attack, it was too convenient, too perfectly staged. And what did it accomplish? The Prime Minister was sent to France with his face bound in bandages. That was the key. It meant that no one who truly knew him, could verify his identity. That alone set my little grey cells to work. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And so I made inquiries. I visited every hospital between Windsor and London. Not a single one had treated a man with such an injury that morning. And then I knew. The rest, mon ami, was merely child's play for a mind like mine. The following morning, as Hastings sat reflecting on the sheer brilliance of it all, Poirot slid a telegram across the breakfast table. Hastings picked it up, eyes narrowing, as he read the brief message. In time, no name, no place of origin. But the meaning was clear. Later that evening, the newspapers carried triumphant headlines. The Allied conference had taken place as planned. Mr. David Mackay, England's indomitable Prime Minister, had delivered an electrifying speech, met with thunderous applause, a speech that had things gone differently, he would never have lived to give. As Hastings put down the paper, he turned to his friend with newfound anger. Well, Poirot, once again you've outwitted them all. Poirot simply smiled, steepling his fingers. But of course, mon ami, it is only natural. And with that, he reached for his ever-present moustache wax, as though the events of the past days had been no more than a slight diversion from the far more pressing matter of maintaining his impeccable appearance.